Hello there, and welcome to That's Absurd. Please elaborate. I am Trace Dominguez, one of the two hosts of the stitches in the fabric of the podcast that is this episode.
Ooh, I'm
Julian.
One of the sutures holding this together, Julian Huguet.
Yeah.
Look at that. And we're so intertwined, woven in this podcast quilt that we've been making for over a year now.
You were thinking quilt. I was thinking like sock, like a tube, and we're just like at the end holding the toes together.
I feel like we'd be a really ratty sock. We'd be like just barely holding on by a thread as a metaphor for this podcast. We didn't just record this intro a second time after royally botching the first one on a tangent about sad theater kids. No.
Now you're bringing it up again.
I am. But we are the ratty sock of podcasting.
See, I thought we'd be more like the novelty sock of podcast, but with like Einstein on it, you know? Like
that's fair.
Yeah.
That you've worn to the point of rattiness. I agree.
Yeah.
But I think that more captures what this podcast is, which is science and comedy and kind of just general loosey-goosiness.
Yeah, that sounds about right. If this is your first time tuning in, thank you for listening to That's Absurd. Please elaborate. I hope that we can hook you so you come back and listen to some more episodes. In this show, we answer your questions with science communication skill. So what ends up happening is y'all send in those questions that are absurd, ridiculous, far out, or just absolutely bonkers, and we try and dig into any science that might exist to help explain or answer your question. And this week we have 2 questions from the audience, so every episode we answer as many questions as there are guests or people hosting the show. So Julian and I each have a question. And if you want to submit a question that you can get answered, go down into the show notes of the podcast. You can go to our website. You can call us on the phone at 302-TAPESHOW, TAPESHO. You can email us at hello@that'sabsurdshow.com. There's so many different ways.
Yeah, we made this as easy as possible, really. There's no excuse not to do it.
It's true. I mean, like, there are excuses not to do it.
Yeah.
You're busy writing in your live journal because you're so sad.
You're a sad theater kid. No, we can't bring it up again. We can't bring it up.
No, we already cut it all out.
Yes, exactly. But like, there's no reason to be like, I have a silly question, but I can't.
Ugh.
I just don't know how to reach them. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. Because 2 people did it this week. Well, I mean,
Yes.
a lot of people did.
A lot of people did. We're getting so many questions, and we even put them on our Patreon as a poll. Because we get so many questions from you all, we poll them with our patrons, and the patrons get to decide if we cover one of those questions in a future episode. So if you want to help vote for making the show better and more fun and more interesting, join the Patreon and vote for that. And there are other perks too. But anyway, let's get into our first question today. And Julian, why don't you go first?
Yes.
Who and what is your question about?
Trace, my question this week comes from Adam, who sent us a recording.
Ooh.
Hi guys, this is Adam from Rochester, New York. My question is, what would a perfectly frictionless surface feel like? Would it feel like anything at all? Could you walk across a frictionless floor or even hold a frictionless object? Like so many of my bad ideas, I thought of this question while my wife was driving us somewhere and I was daydreaming. Also, I'll skip asking if this solves anything because it would solve like so many things. Thanks for answering my question.
Okay, that's great.
I love the preface of like many of my bad ideas. This came to me while my wife was driving. Like just before he extends that like, oh, my mind was wandering and that's why, it's just like, what is happening on the road?
That's excellent. Very good.
I love that. Adam also included in his email to us a few things that I want to kind of play around with, because he asked, what would you call it? He says, I'm calling it slipperyite in my head as if it was a mineral, but I'd love to hear other ideas for what to call this fanciful material. So let's start there.
Yeah.
When we do like hypothetical physics problems all the time, right? We always just go like, assume there's no air resistance and no friction, right? Like,
yeah, for math.
To simplify things. And I love the idea of just like somebody has invented a perfectly frictionless material from hypothetical physics world and brought it into the real world, and now we have to deal with those ramifications.
I feel like the name slipperyite is good, but I think people would just pronounce it slipperyite as opposed to slipperyite.
I feel like it would become slipperite.
Slipperite?
Slip right. Mm.
I'm looking at the thesaurus, and I'm getting slithery, greasy, oily, icy, glassy, smooth, slick, slimy, wet. I really like lubricious.
Ooh,
or
gross.
lubricious, but it's usually referring to private time between adults, and so we maybe shouldn't have that. But lubricious is pretty cool.
I like Teflonium.
Ooh, but that's a brand name. But I love the sound of it, though.
I do too.
Teflonium is pretty cool.
Banana peelinoleum. And maybe this is a bit of a walk, but wind wet.
What? What
Wind
is
wet.
that? What?
Wind wet.
What?
Because it's slippery. Wind wet.
Oh, Julian. Julian. No, Julian. No.
Anyway, because you hated that one the most, that's what I'll be calling it for the rest of, of my segment. Okay, so wind wet.
No. This is getting me back for all the times that I've done Blue Bulb Project for 5 minutes.
I will never be able to pay you back for that. Okay. So, would you be able to hold it, right? That's kind of the first question that Adam has. And for this, we need to talk about how we pick stuff up.
Yeah.
Right?
Would I be able to hold?
Could you hold when wet?
When wet-eyed. When wetium.
When wetium.
Well, that would be an element, so.
Yeah, it would be.
Ite. It's usually ite or an eyed.
When wet-eyed?
When wet-eyed?
I don't know. Let's say it's a new element for reasons that I will get into. So we'll call it pure winwetium.
Winwetium.
Winwetium. Okay. So when you pick up any other object, any non-winwetium object, right, most of the time you grip it by the sides with your little fingies and you squeeze it and you lift it up.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And this is possible because of friction.
Right.
So if you want to actually calculate, the amount of friction force, it looks like fun. I actually kind of mean that literally. The equation looks like F equals UN.
Oh, good mnemonic. Good mnemonic. Friction equals...
Mu, technically, it's a Greek letter. It kind of looks like U, but it's mu.
It does look like fun, yeah.
Right? Mu is the coefficient of friction. So the coefficient of friction actually depends on two materials. A lot of people think like, oh, just ice has a coefficient of friction of this, or wood has but it's really like the coefficient of friction between ice and wood, or ice and steel.
Two pieces of ice are going to have a different amount of friction between them than ice and a finger, or ice and something ribbed or bumpy.
Right, exactly. So, for example, a piece of steel sitting on ice has a coefficient of friction of 0.04, whereas wood sitting on ice has a coefficient of friction of 0.05. Right? So there's a little bit more friction between wood and ice than there is between steel and ice. So that's why, you don't see hockey skates
made of wood. Unless you go back in time, obviously.
When everything was wood.
Yeah, back to before the metal age, when they would play hockey on wooden skates.
You know how it was. So the coefficient of friction also depends on whether these objects are moving in relation to each other, right? So if they're not moving, you use the coefficient of static friction. And for steel and ice, that's, like I said, 0.04. But if they're moving, then the coefficient of kinetic friction between steel and ice is 0.01.
Okay.
It's much lower. Another example is rubber and concrete, right? Like the rubber of your tire and the concrete of the road. When the two surfaces aren't moving in relation to each other, the coefficient of friction is 0.9. It's really high. It's almost 1.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is high.
But if the rubber is sliding across the concrete, it's closer to 0.7.
Ooh.
It's lower.
Yeah.
So this is why when you're driving along and, you get cut off or there's just something happens in front of you and you slam on your brakes, if your tires lock up, and you're only slowing down because of the friction between your sliding tire and the road, it takes longer to stop than if your tire keeps rolling while your brakes decelerate you.
Yeah, the anti-lock braking system, ABS.
I know this firsthand because my wife got in a car accident where she locked up I have a video of it, and I went through and I timed how long it would stop because I'm a big nerd and I did a bunch of math.
And she was fine. So you're like, well, now I'm going to use this to learn stuff.
She was fine, but she hit the back of a truck on the LA freeway very slowly, but enough to total our car. And it took a full 7 seconds of just until she finally connected with it. And it just feels like an eternity, and that's because that coefficient of kinetic friction between the rubber of her tire and the concrete of the road is lower than if the wheels had managed to keep rolling. So that's why locking up is bad.
Yeah.
Also, fun kind of side note that I don't think most people think about, but when your tire is rolling along on the road, the surface of the tire and the surface of the road are not moving in relation to each other.
Yeah.
It's like a weird thing to wrap your head around.
Oh, yeah.
Because the tire's rolling, right?
Right.
But the actual point of contact is static. It is not moving.
That's the point, is that it's gripping against it.
Yeah.
Similar to when you're walking, your shoe doesn't move along the sidewalk unless you're doing the moonwalk. It just stops.
Right.
Where your foot is, and the wheel is doing the same thing.
Exactly.
Cool.
And that's why, it can apply forces on the road, and the road pushes back and either accelerates you or decelerates you, right? Because it's actually in contact with the road and not moving.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's the mu part of our fun equation. And then the n is the normal force, right? That's the force that's perpendicular to the surface of an object. That's the normal. So it's pushing in that direction. And it's the same force that holds you up when you're standing on solid ground, right? And it's the force pushing back against your body being pushed into it by gravity. Well, when you're gripping something with your fingers, right, you're squeezing and the surface of the object is pushing back with the normal force. Mm-hmm. So you take that normal force, you multiply it by your coefficient of friction, and if your value for friction is equal to or greater than the force of gravity pulling down on it, then you can pick something up.
Got it.
That's why when you squeeze something, lightly, it's hard to pick up. If you squeeze it harder, you can pick it up.
Yeah.
And it also depends on the surface, right? If the coefficient of friction between your fingers and the surface is high, it's easy to pick it up. If it's low, it'll slip out of your hands because it can't overcome gravity.
Or those times when you go to the store and you buy lots of little boxes and you have ADHD, so you're like, I'm not going to make multiple trips to and from the car. I'm going to squish the boxes together like some kind of horrible accordion. And it turns out the coefficient of friction of your hands to the boxes is fine. But you squeeze them and the coefficient of friction between the boxes is like, no, thank you. And they just slide out of the way and you end up with boxes all over the place.
Right.
It's just a normal thing at my house.
I know what you mean, right? When you're trying to carry 20 tissue boxes, but all horizontally.
Yes.
And you're squeezing them, and they bow in the middle, right?
Yeah.
And that also brings up, the issue of, like, the angle of the normal force is not, like, the angle of the forces changes.
It can get very complicated very quickly.
It can. And so can friction, right? What I've just described is really like a simplified, idealized equation for dealing with friction. It works well in most cases, but there's so many instances when you're talking about friction where it doesn't hold true. For example, right, you might think intuitively that if the surface of something is rough, then it's going to have more friction than if the surface of something is smooth. And
yeah, absolutely. That totally makes sense.
And we can understand that, right? At a microscopic level, like all these little grooves kind of interact with the grooves of your finger or what have you, and they interlock, and then there's more force as a result. Fine. But if you have two pieces of metal and you keep making them smoother and smoother and smoother, and you remove any surface contaminants between them, and you have them in a vacuum, and you put them next to each other, and you try and slide them, you can't, because they'll cold weld to each other.
What?
Right? Say you have, if it's the same type of metal, right, in space, and again, there's no surface contaminants, and you put them next to each other, and they're really, really, really smooth, then the molecules will just form a bond with each other. And they'll
just be like, yeah. Oh, hey, you're aluminum. I'm aluminum.
Oh, nice.
Let's be aluminum friends.
So obviously that contravenes our idea of like, oh, if it's smoother, it should be easier to push, right? Also, if things get smoother, eventually the mechanical forces are reduced, but molecular forces might take over. Molecular interaction might still impart some friction between them. So even though it's really smooth, you can't push it as easily as you might think. Ground glass plates moving against each other actually have less friction than smooth glass plates rubbing against each other. It's confusing. There's a lot of variables.
I'm having a lot of friction in my brain understanding this concept.
Right. So that F equals mu n, again, it works well for a wide range of cases for our idealized physics problems usually, but it's not perfect. It also doesn't take into account like contact area. Usually it doesn't make a big enough difference again in our idealized cases, but sometimes like if the contact area of a thing is really small, then it's putting enough pressure to dig into the other surface more and then you get more friction. So it's complicated.
It's complicated.
But let's imagine that we've made this Winwedium, right? And it's super, super smooth.
Yeah.
And we've managed to make it so those molecular forces that might take over if it were really smooth, those aren't present either. Somehow, we've got something where the coefficient of friction of this object, no matter what it's touching, right? Our skin, the rubber soles of our shoes, it's always 0.
0. Wow.
Well, then you cannot use friction to pick this object up, right? You cannot grip it from the side and squeeze into it and pull on it because no matter how much the normal force is, anything multiplied by 0 is 0. It will not resist the pull of gravity. Your hand will just slide right off it, right? The only way to pick it up would be to use the normal force of your hand pressing up against, the weight of this object. So having your hand underneath it.
Like scooping it up.
Right, and then you pick it up.
So it's just like those things you used to get at Natural Wonders at the mall. Those little tubes that you're trying to hold on to them and they're like, woo, woo,
yes.
woo, ee, woo. Like that.
I mean, my mind went to a bar of soap, but yeah, if that's where yours goes, like, sure, totally.
Well, yeah, I don't use bar soap.
You bathe with one of those squeezy tube things?
I do this woo, 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 in the shower, and now I'm clean.
Oh, man. Trace, I have horrible news. I just go in there, just go, woo, wee, woo.
Okay, we did the Mario episode already. That was a couple episodes ago.
I can't stop doing it now.
It was fun. And we sounded pretty like Mario. So, if you...
It was convincing.
If you do Mario sound effects, you can call us. We're here.
Again, I am much cheaper than Chris Pratt or Charles Martinet. All right. So, you'd have to support Wonderflonium or whatever underneath. You pick it up. But if you tilt your hand just a little bit, right, and gravity manages to apply any sort of force in a direction not straight into the palm of your hand, it's going to start sliding off.
Oh my gosh.
So it would be very, very difficult to actually pick up and control.
And you wouldn't be able to grab it to stop it because it would just keep falling, it would just keep going.
Yeah, and let's say you react, you tilt your hand back the other way so it stops sliding. Well, then it starts going that direction. You'd have to tilt it back so you'd perfectly cancel out the force of gravity.
Yeah, it'd be like holding a ping pong ball on a paddle, but the ping pong ball is like very slippery.
Yes.
You can do that, and it's easy enough to, kind of go back and forth. But, man, oh, gosh.
It would take a lot of effort, for sure.
Yeah.
So, to answer that section of Adam's question, yeah, you could hold it, but it wouldn't be easy. And then, to skip ahead a little bit to standing on a floor made of Winwedium.
Oh, God.
It would not feel like you're in free fall. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, I play hockey. I spend a lot of time on ice. Ice is plenty slippery.
Yeah.
But you still do not have the same sensation of falling through the air. And that is, again, because of the normal force, right? The ground is pushing back up against you, and you feel that, through your feet, through your joints, and you have the sensation of standing upright. Now, the problem is when you try and start walking on it. I mean, you're also from a very cold area, right, in Michigan. Have you ever walked out on a frozen lake?
All the time.
Or just when ice is on your stairs?
Yeah, when there's ice on the stairs, that's actually way worse. At least if I'm walking onto a frozen lake, I know what I'm doing. You go walk out onto a hockey rink, you know what's happening. You just walk carefully. But people do it all the time. At every hockey game, there's somebody in shoes walking out onto the ice for some reason or another. So
it's much easier to do it after the period is over and the ice has been roughed up and you can walk on it, again, because the coefficient of friction of the rough ice is higher. But yes, you know what it's like, though, when you suddenly step on like a patch of ice you weren't expecting.
Yeah.
Right?
Black ice is serious when there's ice on a sidewalk that you don't know is there. There's this guy, I'm still mad about this. When I was in college, there was this very slight dip, like a hill, very slight on campus. And there was this dude just standing there watching people fall down. He did not warn them. He knew that it had ice on it. And he just stood next to that spot on the sidewalk and people would fall down and he'd go, and I was like, you suck. Like, not only did you know it was slippery, and you specifically chose not to tell the people that you know are about to walk on it, but then you just laughed at them.
That guy has no empathy whatsoever.
Zero. Again, that guy,
terrible.
Sociopath.
Completely.
Like, not cool, bro. Not cool.
Wow.
Outside the psychology building, too. I was like,
Bro, you should be inside. You need to be getting looked at. Okay, well, but like when you step on ice and you start losing your footing, you try and adjust in the way that you're used to when you're standing on ground that grips.
Yeah.
And it doesn't go well most of the time.
No.
You put another foot out and then that doesn't grip and that slides, and then you try again with your other foot and you slip and you try and get your center of gravity, underneath you, but you can't actually grip to do that. It's a mess and you end up falling down.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just going to be that to the extreme.
Whoa.
As soon as you try and make any sort of movement, you could, hold yourself up if your balance is okay, but there's no way to really correct it once you start losing it.
Huh.
So, yes, you would need like a propulsive system to get around somehow, but it wouldn't be the same as being in free fall.
Yeah.
Especially when you actually fall and your face hits the winwedium.
Yeah.
And it smushes and hurts a lot and bruises you.
Ouchie.
Right?
Because it's still there. It's still a physical object, even if you don't have friction on it.
Right.
It's like still going to stop your motion.
That normal force is still going to apply. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's talk about now what's more complicated, and that is, what would it feel like?
Like if you touched it.
Yes. So you could feel it, right?
Yeah, it's there.
It is there, and it will trigger receptors in your skin. There's actually, this is probably not going to surprise you, but feeling things is complicated.
What?
I know that sounds like an emo band song name.
Wow. Maybe we should have kept our original intro about being
about
the sad theater kids. Theater kids.
But yes, feeling things is complicated. Okay, you know what? We've referenced the intro so many times, Lister. We're gonna put it at the end. So if you want a brief discussion on what it was like to be a theater kid in high school, we'll have that at the back. But anyway, yes, feeling things is complicated, to put it mildly. So you have receptors in your skin, obviously, but there are different types of receptors. Mm-hmm. You have Merkel's discs. These provide information on pressure, position, deep static touch features such as shape and edges. You have Ruffini corpuscles. These sense the stretching of your skin, movement, and finger position. You have Meissner corpuscles. They're involved in skin movement and object handling detection. They're stimulated through dynamic deformation. You have Pacinian corpuscles. They sense vibrations. They detect fine textures. So these things all combine in the way they send information to your brain. And you can categorize them as either slowly adapting or rapidly adapting. So Merkel's discs and Ruffini corpuscles, they are slowly adapting. They send messages when the stimulation is applied, and then they keep sending it. And these messages tell you about steady pressure. They sense the texture of an object. They sense the edges, the shape of an object. Mm-hmm. Whereas the ones that are rapidly adapting, the Meissner corpuscles and the Pacinian corpuscles, they send a signal at first when they're stimulated, and then they stop.
Oh.
So they respond to changes, like when things move around.
Cool.
So from just these things alone, you can see already how you have a pretty complex picture of how an object is going to feel in your hand, what the texture's like, whether it's moving, where the edges are, what the shape of the overall object is.
How much pressure you're putting on it, how much pressure it's putting on you.
Yes, exactly. So that's just the start, and then these signals get sent to your brain. right? And in your brain, in the somatosensory cortex part of your brain, they get decoded, and this is where things can get really complicated. And I thought about this the same way that I thought about how interesting it is that sounds can be different.
Mm-hmm.
Two instruments can be playing the same note,
Yeah.
but you can tell if one is from a violin versus a piano because of other things embedded in the frequency that your brain interprets, right?
Right.
Or taste, like how complicated taste can be, because you're working with hardware that is kind of limited.
Yeah.
But the way that it combines and is interpreted in your brain is so multitudinous. There's so many different ways for these neurons to fire, like in different combinations, that you can get a lot of different tastes. You can get a lot of different smells, right?
Yeah.
And texture is no different. So when you are feeling things in your brain, it's going to trigger certain specific sets of neurons up there. And researchers have done this. They've taken like rotating drums covered in strips of different types of material, and they've had monkeys touch it basically, and they've monitored the neurons of these monkeys, and they can tell just by the pattern of the neurons that are firing what material the monkey is touching.
Cool.
Because all the different materials trigger groups of neurons in different ways, in different combinations. And so if you were to feel Winwedium, I don't think we could answer the question of what it would feel like beyond the pressure until we actually touch it, because we don't know what parts of your brain, what patterns of neurons in your brain are going to fire and what that's going to ultimately be interpreted as in your brain.
Right.
I thought about this at first and I was like, well, no, you wouldn't be able to feel anything beyond pressure. But honestly, I don't know, because it's dependent on just what your brain wants to do.
Yeah, maybe it'd be like they call it hallucinating in AI, where you give something the same prompt and it might give different replies and different results and all sorts of different things. But that's based on kind of how the term, not the actual function of it, is based on how we think. Sometimes you hallucinate things that aren't really there, mirages and, all of that in the desert. There are, phantom limbs and other ways that your brain kind of puts things together that don't really exist. And I wonder if something like frictionless, because it is so foreign a concept, if you were to feel it and like pull your hand across it like you would any other surface, if your brain would just put things in, because it would be like coming up with, okay, well, I'm just pulling as much information as I can out, and it's not really, there's not enough there, so I'm just going to kind of make stuff up based on what I know or what I'm looking at or what temperature it might be, because you'd still get heat transfer potentially. You'd still be able to tell you're pushing on something, but sliding down, if it's frictionless, you wouldn't feel any texture. You wouldn't feel any, really weird.
Yeah, anything grabbing, but you definitely, like we've talked about, you'd feel the pressure.
Yeah.
But would your brain interpret the surface of this material in a specific way that gives it a feeling unique to that material? I don't know enough to give you a definitive answer, but it would not surprise me if that were the case. And I thought that was really fascinating.
That's so neat to think about.
It is. It really, really is. This is about as far as I could really get with my research and my limited understanding based on like the papers that I read. But I really wanted to do right by Adam and see if I could get like an actual expert to tackle this. And so I reached out cold to Dr. Justin Lieber, who was the lead author on that paper that I mentioned where they had monkeys touching rotating drums. You
did a journalism!
I did journal. And not only that, but like a lot of times I contact people I know. This was just a shot in the dark.
I love it.
And this guy, Dr. Lieber, is, if you want to talk about how sense works in your brain, specifically for touch, like, this is the guy. If you go to Google Scholar, all his papers are just like the neural basis of tactile texture perception, and like that's his whole bag. Okay. So I reached out to Dr. Lieber, who's at NYU now as a postdoctoral associate, and I just said, hey, we've got a dumb podcast, and somebody asked us a question, that they came up with while they were daydreaming and their wife was driving the car. Do you have the time, good sir? Might I interest you in sparing us, a bit of your knowledge? And he wrote back, and his email is fantastic, okay?
Okay.
He wrote back almost immediately, said, "Hey, Julian, I'm happy to try and help. It's a great question, and one I've spent way too much time thinking about."
Oh, that's the best.
Adam, you are not the only one who wonders what a frictionless surface would feel like.
Yeah.
That's where Dr. Lieber starts in his email, and he kind of covers some of the things that I already mentioned, which makes me feel good about my ability to research and understand things. He says, this question has a straightforward answer. The surface would feel smooth and slippery. The best analog would probably be a bar of soap. Those two properties, smoothness and stickiness, are somewhat counterintuitively independent features of a surface. Whether a surface is rough or smooth generally has to do with how bumpy the surface is. Whether a surface is sticky or slippery is more directly related to the coefficient of friction of its material. So, for example, two different smooth surfaces can be slippery, like a polished floor, or sticky, like rubber. So that's cool, kind of what we already talked about, but interesting that the tactile perception of smoothness and stickiness are not related.
Yeah.
Now, he says, somewhat intuitively, the coefficient of friction of a surface is a good predictor of how sticky people perceive it to be. So a frictionless surface would definitely be slippery. It would also have to be smooth. Any bumps on a surface that were significant enough to make it feel rough would almost necessarily have to add the kinds of transverse forces that would lead to friction. So a surface with no friction would probably have to be both slippery and smooth. Mm-hmm. One odd property of an object with frictionless surfaces is that you would have a very hard time picking it up. You wouldn't be able to grip it like a normal object. It would just slip right through your fingers. The best bet would probably be to cup your hands, knock the object inside somehow, and hope that it doesn't slip out. So that's basically exactly what I said.
Yes, exactly what we thought. Oh, that's great.
Yay! Okay, cool.
That's good. That feels good.
Oh, you
No
can
pun
totally
intended.
trust us listeners. We don't know what it feels like. Okay, now, second, he says, how would your brain respond to a frictionless surface? The truth is, we know very, very little about how the surface properties translate to patterns of neural activity. The experiments are difficult and the results are confusing. From my work and others, we do know that when surfaces are rough, they tend to drive more activity in your nervous system. First in the nerves connecting your hand to your brain, and then later in areas like primary somatosensory cortex. So because these frictionless surfaces would be smooth, scanning your fingers over them would likely drive very little activity early in these neural pathways. We also know that as you move further down the neural pathways into higher tactile areas like secondary somatosensory cortex, you start to see some neurons with new response properties. Neurons that are more active when surfaces are less rough, and less active when surfaces are more rough. These would, in theory, be the frictionless surface preferring neurons, but you only start to see them after a few stages of brain processing. A lot less is known about how stickiness versus slipperiness affects brain activity. One thing that seems likely is that your sense of stickiness is driven by very transient events at the start of movement. There's a specific stick-slip interaction that happens when you first start to move your finger. This is analogous to the transition from static friction to dynamic friction that gets taught in physics classes and is also something that we brought up. Hooray. This transition co-occurs with a fast burst of tangential force within the skin of the finger, and this force likely drives a fast burst of neural activity. So when something, slides across your hand, you get that fast burst.
You get this little ooh, and your brain goes, oh, gotta process that. That just happened. Gotta process it.
It's also likely that the duration and magnitude of this burst of neural activity correlates with 1, the frictional forces, and 2, the perception of stickiness, but it hasn't been studied carefully.
Whoa.
What that means is that a surface with no friction would have no stick-slip transition and thus no associated neural burst. Presumably, just like roughness, some neurons in the brain, possibly in secondary somatosensory cortex, might be particularly active for very smooth surfaces, but that's just speculation. No one's ever tested something like that before. Hope that's helpful. Justin, that was incredibly helpful.
Helpful. Wow. I find myself running my hand along my desk while you're telling me about this, and I'm like, okay, yes. When I first start running my hand on my desk, I feel like I'm not moving. I start moving and it sort of pulls on your skin, right? Like the friction between me and my desk, I can like feel it.
Right.
Just without, if you like just kind of move your hand around like just a little bit, you can kind of like feel your skin moving because your hand is stuck to that. Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder if it would feel the way an optical illusion looks.
Huh. That's an interesting idea.
Like you'd be touching it, but your brain would be like, you're touching it, but you're also not really feeling it the way I expect to feel it. And so thus I'm trying to like fill in the, gaps, and it might feel like it's vibrating. Like I'm just
I don't know.
Obviously making stuff up, but like that's so neat.
Yeah, I imagine it would be very confusing feeling. I almost wonder if it's like, when you're sitting on a train and the train next to you starts to move, and you have the sensation like you see movement, but you don't feel it because you're not the one moving. I almost wonder, right, like you could see this object slide on your fingers, but it's the only time you're not going to have that burst of neural activity that Dr. Lieber describes because there's no friction to like actually create a force on your fingers and trigger those neurons the way he's talking about. But that's also very cool that we have neurons that are more active, it seems, when things aren't being triggered, right? Like that when surfaces are less rough, there's certain neurons that are more active. That's so cool. But again, that speaks to the patterns of neurons that we talk about that combine together to give you that feeling of texture that you interpret in some way. Wow. So, I thought that was extremely enlightening and just so cool. Again, the thing we always talk about in this, we're like, you just reach out to people who have spent their entire, academic careers looking into this, and you're like, please, I have a dumb, silly question. And they're like, let me write you a whole 6 paragraphs that'll tell you everything you need to know. And that was just so fantastic. So thanks to Dr. Justin Lieber for that. And thank you, Adam, for your question. I don't know how satisfying that answer is to Adam about what would it feel like, because again, that is something that I think we could only know if we actually had it and touched it for the first time.
Yeah.
But would you be able to feel it? Would you have the sensation that you were like standing on a surface of it? Could you feel a brick of it in your hand? Yes. Those neurons that are sensitive to pressure would still get triggered. You would still feel it. But what it would feel like, I can't even imagine it.
So it's funny that you mentioned this because it reminds me of this thing that I did when I was at space camp, like forever ago. And it's called the 5 Degrees of Freedom Simulator. It was used by like the early Apollo astronauts. And they had one at space camp and they strapped us into it. And it's basically like a reverse air hockey table. Like it's floating on a cushion of air. I'm sure it's not frictionless. I'm sure it's very low friction, right? But it still felt weird. It felt different than I think I can describe. I grew up going on hockey rinks. It doesn't feel like that. It feels completely different from that. It's very strange. So it had these big discs, and it would force air down at the smooth floor in the space camp hangar, and you could get strapped into it, and then somebody could just push you with one finger, and this whole apparatus plus you would just slide away from them. I can tell you that felt weird.
I bet.
Like, it felt so weird to, like, just grab onto something, and then when you let go, you would float away with it, because you had technically pushed, even though you're just letting go of something, you're technically pushing off of it. So you would move away from things very slowly. I was only in it for 5 or 6 minutes, and this was decades ago. But at the same time, I will never forget that feeling because it did feel weird, and I've never felt anything like that.
I can't imagine. We talk about the coefficient of friction between like ice and the steel of a skate blade being low, but 0.04 compared to 0 in terms of the coefficient, still pretty high, right?
Yeah.
Like your realistic basis of comparison just doesn't really exist for something frictionless. And if you were to feel it for the first time, I can't imagine that it would be so alien to anything you've encountered. It would be so far beyond anything. And all the normal ways that you cope with losing your balance or like sliding away from something would also go out the window, right? Like you said, it just takes the most minimal of forces and you're off and floating away. And I can't imagine what that's like to try and overcome because, you could try and push back and it's just going to do nothing.
Yeah.
Now I'm having nightmares
strange.
about being on a spacewalk and the tether breaking and then just like slowly drifting farther away from the spacecraft.
Yeah.
But it would probably be akin to that.
I can only imagine. I think we can all only imagine. Well, anyway, imagine, if you will, during the break, and we'll come back and we'll do something that's a little more tangible for my question. Julian, give me your best dinosaur roar.
Oh, God, an asteroid! It's horrible!
Wow, that was not where I expected that to go. We're popping in before the show to tell you about I Know Dino. It's a dinosaur podcast.
You know, we think of those dinosaurs being this thing that's been dead for tens of millions of years. Even so, studying dinosaurs can still teach us stuff that is relevant to the world today.
Yeah, like climate models to help us understand global warming.
Migration patterns of dinosaur lineages, they tell us about Earth's changing continents.
We can also study dinosaur diets, what plants lived then and maybe what animals and how they interact.
And, this is super cool, many dinosaur injuries, paleopathologies, they're the first known occurrences of diseases.
And they talk about all this kind of stuff on I Know Dino. It comes out every week with new dinosaur stories that you're not going to hear anywhere else. Like, I hadn't heard of a lot of these, which is pretty cool.
You can find I Know Dino on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever podcasts are. And if you found us, you can probably find them. Go check them out. Hello, and welcome back to That's Absurd. Please elaborate. I hope our first answer didn't rub you the wrong way.
You thought of that, didn't you?
Friction joke. Well, now that that's over, Trace, what is your question this week?
My question is, how bad would a dog's bark have to be worse than its bite? And it was sent in by Grace, who sent us a voice note.
Howdy, y'all. It's Grace from Texas. And my question is, how bad would a dog's bark have to be in order for it to be worse than its bite? So I came up with this question because I am an old person trapped in a young person's body. And not only do my joints hurt, but I also love little folksy sayings and idioms and just the jokey things that people love to say that you always hear from your grandpa. And I love to tell people that my bark is worse than my bite as like, haha, it's okay, I'm friendly. And so I was told somebody that right after I'd finished listening to an episode, and I was like, I wonder, how bad would a dog's bark have to be? And I was like, I know just the people to ask.
We've done it.
She does. She knows.
I know just the people to ask.
I know. We have burrowed into her brain.
Thank you, Grace, for that question.
She sounds delightful. I cannot imagine her bark being bad at all, frankly.
Yeah. No, seems great. Seems super great. So she elaborated in her written version to say, I assume a bark could be bad enough to cause hearing damage, but how loud or how intense would it have to be to break skin? How about cause organ damage or death? And I was like, wow, that is intense stuff.
Ooh, good leads. Good leads from Grace.
So, Julian, you have dogs.
I do have dog.
Dog?
Yeah, I have one now.
Yeah.
It barks enough for 3.
So, does Pepper's bark hurt?
When I'm trying to sleep, yes. At 3 a.m. when there's a single noise outside, yes. It hurts me. It's a delayed hurt because then the next day I like have to do work or drive or something and I'm dying inside a little bit. But physically in that moment, no, it can be irritating.
Right.
That's about it.
Yeah. It's loud, but it's not hurt you loud. And for those unfamiliar, by the way, in the U.S., we have this idiom, a dog's bark is worse than their bite, or my bark is worse than my bite. It basically means I'll run my mouth and I'll, say stuff, but I'm not going to actually hurt you. I'm like nicer than I seem.
Yeah.
Is basically what it's saying.
Or somebody's putting on a front that they're very tough, but really they're nothing to worry about,
Right. Maybe they're gruff on the outside, but they're actually like nice and soft and teddy bearish on the inside.
Or they don't have the actual ability to hurt you.
Yeah, exactly.
When I use it, I think of somebody who's like a big old jerk. Not Grace, obviously. Not in this case. Somebody, like a coworker that's a pain, but like I know they're actually not going to go to management or whatever and do anything about it.
Yeah.
They're just like, oh, they just complain a lot. Like, oh, their bark is worse than their bite. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where this phrase comes from, in case you're curious. But the idea is the dog's bark, as in that audible thing that the dog does, being somehow worse than a physical attack by the dog, or at least bite. So dogs' barks, again, loud. The loudest barks can reach 90 decibels, which is like motorcycle lawnmower levels.
It's quite loud, yeah.
But they're quite short. They're only a second or two at a long end. They're just little, like, kind of claps, more like bah, bah. And most those are lower. They're in the 80 decibels range, which, again, if you're not familiar, a decibel is a logarithmic scale, so 80 is significantly less than 90. And there are a couple of sources that I used to kind of learn this. There was a sound study of kennels in Australia where they actually put mics around outside the kennel to determine how far the dog's barkings would go. And inside the kennel, it was reaching into the hundreds of decibels, like 110, because they were just so many dogs all barking together. And also I learned from dogster.com, which, this seems like a good source for dog stuff.
Yeah, why not?
But anyway, 80 decibels. So dogs bark for different reasons. There's attention, greeting, threat, territorial, frustration, compulsive behavior, injury, etc. But the length of a typical bark is just a second or so. The thing is, I kept looking up the characteristics of dogs' barks, the ways dog bark. There's not a lot of science here that talks about their length, or there are different barks for different things, but there just doesn't seem to be as much science as I hoped. So we're going to use just like 80 decibels for 1 second. That's a pretty low amount of energy, especially if you think about how much area that covers.
I also feel like a second is a very long bark, right? Like I feel like fractions of a second is more realistic.
Yeah, like half a second. No, I totally agree.
So you're really being generous with like 80 for 1 second.
Trying to be super generous and just be like, this is a huge bark, because we're trying to get it to the level of a physical attack. So sound is a force. We already use it as all sorts of different things. Well, sound isn't a force. Sound can create or cause the feeling of force because it's a pressure wave. It moves through physical objects. It moves through mediums. And we use it for all sorts of things. Have you heard about the medical way of breaking up kidney stones using sound? Have you heard of this?
No, really?
Yeah, so it's called extracorporeal shockwave lithotripsy. It's something like that.
First try.
Yeah, nailed it without any edits. Sound is used to break up those kidney stones by put them on a waterbed, basically. They use an ultrasound or X-ray as a guide to point something at where the kidney stone is, and then they use ultrasonic sound and shatter the kidney stones. They can do this without damaging your organs. When I was young, my aunt had this done, and I was just like, that sounds amazing. Like, it sounds like magic.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Does the frequency that they use, though, does that have anything to do with the harmonic frequency of the stone? Or is that
good question.
just purely the sound energy, right?
I think they're just imparting energy.
Right. Because my thinking is, this is an important concept in engineering a lot of the time, where the length of a sound wave through a material is something that you have to take into account when you're building a structure, because if you accidentally make the harmonic length of the wave also like the same value as something else in the system, right, you can shake yourself apart. The Saturn V rocket, for example, in one of the early tests of like the second stage, the engines were having this issue where they were kicking on and off in what they call pogo. Like it would fire and then stop and then fire and then stop.
Yeah.
And they realized this when there were no astronauts aboard during a test, thank goodness, because it would have shaken them around really badly and they would have had to abort. And they realized the problem was that the frequency that the engines were firing at and the frequency of the rocket itself were too similar. And it was causing the whole thing to vibrate. And so it was causing this pogo effect where it was making the engine shut on and off. Yeah, and they had to redesign the structure of the rocket to change the harmonic frequency of the structure. So I don't know if it's purely like the sound energy or just kind of taking advantage of the fact that if you send a wavelength of the right signal, you can kind of get the kidney stone to shake itself apart. I don't know. That's something I would love to look into further, but that's really cool to me.
It's a really neat way to use sound and to not damage the tissues around the kidney stone. And they say specifically in the research, since it's not technically about this, I didn't look too deeply into it, but they shoot ultrasonic sound, they said. So it seems like it would be very high frequency sound. So my guess is they're just shaking it with the sound, and maybe it has something to do with harmonics, but I don't know. Sounds pretty cool, though. I'd love to look into it.
Yeah.
And this isn't the only way we use sound in things, by the way. We use sound all sorts of different ways. There's acoustic levitation. We've done videos about it on D News and Seeker over the years. It's where you levitate super duper light objects by placing them in specific spots where there are standing waves between sound. So essentially speakers that are shooting sound at each other. And in the middle of those are standing waves, things that don't move. And you can like set stuff in the standing wave.
You get a node in the standing wave, right? So
Yeah.
it's just always like a pressurized spot, basically.
Yeah. And what's really holding it up isn't so much the sound as the air that the sound
Right.
is moving, right? So it's tough to really think about it that way, but the sound is what is moving the air and imparting that energy, but the air itself is the thing, to kind of use your point from earlier, the friction that is holding it in space.
Right. That's the normal force.
Yeah,
provider.
the normal force, exactly. And so the University of Michigan in 2012 used ultrasonic sound to create a scalpel-like cutting tool. They have acoustic and sonic weapons, LRADs, or long-range acoustic devices, sound cannons, noise bazookas, that can be very painful and disruptive. None of these will kill you, though. None of these will cut your skin. The ultrasonic scalpel could, but it's quite small and very precise. But long-range acoustic devices, LRADs, they can be audible. They can be inaudible, which would be ultrasonic, above the frequency that we can hear. That can still damage you. And they've been used in crowd control since the 1990s. And they're in use currently in more than 100 countries. And we need more laws about LRADs and how they work, because it can really hurt people. They can damage internal membranes by vibrating them. They can damage hearing, obviously, and there's not a lot of regulation or control over them, and they're usually used for crowd dispersal during protests. So, not a big fan of that. But they say that what they can use them for is to shoot speech. Like, you can hear somebody speaking almost 9 kilometers away from the device.
Wow.
It's really, really, really loud.
Because it's just like a tight beam? Is there a beam at all, or is it?
It's like a beam of sound, yes.
Wow.
At 20 meters, or about 65 feet, it can cause pain. At 1 meter, it's equivalent to a shotgun blast in terms of decibels, but it can be sustained. It's just constant shotgun blast, which is wild. At 180 decibels, it instantly destroys your ear tissues. 194 decibels is the loudest possible sound available to air. Above that, we're into shock waves, where we're exceeding the speed, that it can move through the air. So how do we make a dog sound do actual damage, right? 80 decibels is such a low amount of energy relative to 194, because again, it's logarithmic, remember, so it makes this hockey stick kind of graph. But let's go just put a pin in that for a second and come up with some parameters. So now we know kind of how we can do damage, right? We need to get into the hundreds of decibels. You have to ramp up the intensity. But let's understand then bite energy. We need our parameters here. VCA Animal Hospital says that dog bites can cause significant injury to the skin and soft tissues. Dog teeth and jaws are very powerful, and the wounds they inflict can crush, tear, and penetrate through chest walls, through skin and muscle. They can cause lung collapse, serious or fatal damage to intestinal organs and internal organs. That's pretty serious stuff. You can study it, right? Dogs bite things for fun. They bite things when they're angry too, but they bite things for fun. So scientists can set up experiments where they put pressure sensors into stuff and have dogs bite it. Mm-hmm. And it's not necessarily generalizable, because they only can do that with those dogs. And they have to do thousands and thousands and thousands of dogs to make it useful overall. But they've done it with a handful of dogs, 70, 80 in different studies. And the large dogs always bite with more force than the small dogs. Sorry, Pepper. Don't tell Pepper.
It's probably a good thing.
And you know why, right, Julian? The larger dog bites with more force.
I could see multiple reasons for that, right? They're going to have probably a longer snout, so they're going to have more leverage.
Right.
And then they're also just going to have more muscle between the jaw and the skull, and so they're just going to get more force.
Yeah, that's right. There was a study in Frontiers in Vet Science where they had dogs and cats both bite a transducer, and they found that they could put like up to 1,100 newtons, depending on the tooth, into this transducer. That's a lot.
It's a lot of force.
1,100 newtons is a lot of force. That was for the carnassial teeth, by the way, which if you think of dogs and cats, they usually have the pointy teeth in the front, and then they have like a canine, that's the canine tooth, then they have a tooth behind that, and they have a tooth behind that that's kind of like a wide molar with like a little mountain shape to it. That's called a carnassial tooth. It's for grinding, cutting, and shearing through meat. And so that's where they can get the most force, which makes sense. It's inside the mouth. They're trying to cut through stuff. And so in that study, they actually acknowledged, and this was in 2018, this is a really useful picture of how much force you can get out of a dog's bite and a cat's bite. But it would be better if they could do a 3D model. So in 2020, the Journal of Experimental Biology did just that. Researchers used 3D modeling of actual dog skulls to learn about the complex relationship between jaw shape and bite performance. There's different jaw shapes. I didn't know this. I didn't have a dog growing up. Did you know this?
That you didn't have a dog? Yeah, I think you told me.
I didn't have a dog. There's like the Dachshund Collie Great Dane shape, the long nose pointy face shape, which is called dolichocephalic. I don't know. Got it. Then there's the Pomeranian Beagle Golden Retriever middle kind of length, which is mesocephalic. And then there's shorter nose, flat-faced, wider dogs, pugs, boxers, bulldogs. That's brachiocephalic.
Okay.
And which of those do you think bites the hardest?
I'm going to go out on a limb and say the longest ones. Or is it the short ones? Is it the short ones? It's like the bulldogs and stuff? Yeah. I mean, that makes more sense with experience, but I'm struggling to kind of reason out why.
Yeah. They actually think that it has to do with where the muscles are placed on the skull, how long the skull is. And so like those two things combine where you have this sweet spot where the dog breed that you have bred, specifically usually the breeds that were bred for biting, grabbing, hunting. Rottweilers, for example, bred for protection, so they're very good at biting and grasping. Whereas like a Pomeranian, it bites a lot, but not particularly good at grabbing and pulling with those bites. I'm not going to mention specific breeds other than that, just because I'm mentioning because it came up in the study. The internet hates to hear that we bred animals for specific skills, including biting and attacking. So I'm just not going to get into it. I don't think it's worth that getting into that fight.
All right, fair enough.
So the point is they use 3D geometric morphometric analyses. Very fancy sounding for we looked at their skulls and modeled them. And they created a bunch of equations, literal math equations to determine bite force based on morphology, which is cool. And then they tested their model against real dogs and they were like, yeah, actually predicted the bite force based on their different skulls, which is cool.
Good boys and girls.
Yeah. So that carnassial tooth is still the most. They think that it can get up to 2,000 newtons, whereas the canine teeth is up to 1,268 newtons, and incisors, which are like the fronts, are 1,000, 1,100 newtons. So I'm going to go way lower than that. We're going to say there are a range, from 100 to 1,100, from 120 to 1,268, from 214 to 2,172 newtons. And the carnassial tooth is like for biting over and over and tearing. We're not talking about that. We're just talking about trying to get it to the same level. So I went with about 600 newtons. I picked that because I looked at a graph that they made when they were testing their models against different breeds of dog to see how their models did. And they literally used studies of the dogs biting these transducers and mapped them all out. And they said, here's the ones that bite the hardest. Here's the different skull morphologies. And kind of in the middle, it seemed like most dogs could bite around 600 newtons. Super unscientific for me to do this. But again, there's not like a specific, this is how much a dog bites by. They're all different.
Right. There's too many variables.
Yeah, there's just too many variables. And so I just picked a number. And I also found another study of Helsinkian German Shepherd police dogs, and they all exceeded the measurement tool's range of bite force, meaning that they were biting at over 300 newtons per square centimeter, which is a lot.
A lot of pressure.
Yeah. And then there are other studies in the imperial system where they said 435 psi, was how much a dog's bite. Like if you just Google how hard is a dog's bite, you're going to get 435 PSI. The thing is, what does that mean? You know, that's a measure of pressure.
Right.
But it's like atmospheric pressure.
Well, the newtons per square centimeter is also pressure, right? It's force over an area.
Yeah. And PSI is not typically used, but it's interesting because if you think about the teeth versus the mouth, those are completely different areas. So 300 newtons per square centimeter is, you might only be feeling the tips of the teeth versus the whole of the mouth. So again, I just picked a number and we're going to go with that. If you like dogs and you want to study them, go do that. More research is needed.
You'd need to know the contact area then. For the 300 newtons per square centimeter, then you'd need to know, the size of the area. And then you could figure out just force, period, exerted.
Yep. And so what I did is think of a dog's mouth. An average size of a dog's mouth might be 100 square centimeters. That's like the size of a playing card. It's not very big. It's like a medium-sized dog. And the teeth are maybe 5% of that. And so then you can use P equals FA or pressure equals force over area to get about 100 newtons per centimeter squared. Okay?
Okay.
But then, that's the SI unit. That PSI unit, you're going to get somewhere a little higher. So just for the math, let's keep it easy. 150 newtons per square centimeter. So now that we know what we have to get to in order to actually do damage.
That's like roughly having 15 kilograms of mass on, like you said, a square centimeter, basically.
Yes.
Just like resting on it and being pulled on by the force of gravity.
It's a lot.
It's a lot of pressure.
They are carnivores. They are hunters. Like, that makes sense.
Yeah. Or 33 pounds on a square centimeter for people who prefer pounds. I'm not changing the square centimeters.
Yeah, I was going to say, but it's still centimeters, so I'm proud of you for that. So now that we know that there's a dog bite force over an area, and we know how much sound a dog can make, 80 decibels, again, we're giving them the very generous 1 second, you just have to do the math to figure out how those things cross over and if they ever do.
Okay.
So we go back to our total force based on that middle of two measurements, or about 150 newtons per square centimeter times 5 centimeters squared, and I'm doing 5 centimeters squared to be like the area it's actually hitting. So you get about 750 newtons. And to make enough pressure equal to that using sound, which you can just measure as pressure of sound, force over area equals the sound pressure, well, you get 1.5 million pascals are needed to make that level of Newton force. And just so you know, one standard atmosphere is 101 and some decimals kilopascals. So 1.5 million pascals would be the equivalent of making a sound that was 14,803 atmospheres of pressure. So
it's a loud dog.
Ocean depth goes up to 101 kilopascals. So I think at the bottom of the Mariana Trench is 1,000 atmospheres. Like, that's it. We're looking at almost 15 times more pressure. And again, we're talking purely pressure, not about sound waves. And I did that because exactly what you mentioned, frequencies, hertz. Sound is a very complicated thing to compare to other things because of the way waves work. You have to talk about dog vocal cords and how they can actually make sounds. But I asked an LLM to help me with some of this math, and they essentially worked it out to about 5.35 billion watts per square meter would need to be emitted by said dog in order to make that amount of sound.
That's so much power.
It's so many decibels, so much power. And it's not louder than loudest sound. They worked it out to like somewhere in the 120 to 130 decibels would be able to make the sound, but it would be a ridiculous amount of frequency and intensity within that to make it work. And the reason that there's no way that a dog's bark is going to be worse than its bite. Waves are terrible force carriers. Like, they're really bad at moving things around. Energy is great, but it doesn't carry things. It doesn't move things like that in the same way. So hard teeth behind bone being pulled by muscles, that's literally the purpose. And so to compare those forces is just, they're astronomically different.
Right. You've got this like solid material that can apply a force versus just like air molecules in a gas trying to transfer it. I think it's funny that you went in the direction of bringing the bark up to the bite, because, like, the other way to go is like, what if we just made it a really, really weak little bite for this dog?
Yeah.
Right? You took like the average dog bite, and I respect that because it's more interesting. But I also feel
Yeah.
like a cop-out would have been like, I don't know, the dog's got no teeth.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I once went to adopt a cat, and there was George, and he had no teeth. Because the sign said, it was in San Francisco, and the sign wrote, "This is George. He just had a dentist." And they'd pulled all his teeth out. 'Cause he'd not been taken good care of, and he was an old senior citizen cat, and he was still a little high off the meds, and he was so cute and nice.
Oh, George the toothless cat sounds really
This was
adorable.
so long ago, and I love him so much. And
Right.
I didn't take him home. I was sad about it. So my point is, and you're totally right, I could have gone like, oh, what if it was a really light bite? But even then, we're talking not just orders of magnitude, but many, many orders of magnitude different.
We also need to talk about how the energy from sound drops off with the inverse square law. So when you were talking about these crowd dispersal things, you talked about how the closer you get, it becomes phenomenally more loud, and that's just the nature of that sound wave spreading out over a greater and greater area. Whereas the bite, part of why a bite is dangerous is because it's concentrated. The force is concentrated over that very small area on the tip of a tooth, and that's why it can puncture skin and do damage.
Right.
So it's part of why it's such an insane comparison.
Yeah, I mean, it's the idea that, like, what would you rather be stepped on by? A giant snowshoe that's made of pillows or a high heel? You know, like, I would rather the snowshoe, please. You know, it's just like
a stiletto.
This is that,
Yes.
but taken to a ridiculous extreme because you're not even being stepped on by a snowshoe. You're being stepped on by sound. Like,
Right.
So I think, and I didn't say this at the beginning because I think you really just got the point right out of the top. In order to make a dog's bark worse than its bite, you'd have to concentrate it into a perfectly harmonic wave, like a laser of sound.
That's what I'm thinking,
Similar
yes.
to an LRAD.
Yes.
That would vibrate the cell so hard that it would burst it. And this is entirely possible, and basically how that University of Michigan scalpel works, right? It is vibrating at such a frequency and so quickly with ultrasound that it's breaking the thing in front of it. But dogs can't do that.
Thankfully.
With the vocal cords that they have.
This is a side note, but I think about the world of Pokemon all the time and what a absolute nightmare it would be if all of these wild animals had, like, godly elemental powers. And I feel like this is one of them.
Yeah.
Like, just a bark that just, like, disintegrates your body.
Oh, no thank you. It would have to capture a huge amount of air and then expend a huge amount of energy to blow it out into a very concentrated area. The sonic knife uses sound 10,000 times above human hearing, which means its frequency is very, very high, and that creates a shock wave. It exceeds the speed of sound in the material, like in air, and creates a pressure bubble that could cut things. And they could cut things at 150 micrometers.
That's
so again,
so
we're
cool.
talking cellular level. So in order for a dog to be worse than its bite, it would have to be able to do that. It would have to be
amazing.
able to make essentially a super duper high frequency ultrasound that would exert a shock wave onto your flesh. And in doing that, it would be able to cut you at a cellular level, but it probably wouldn't be able to like pierce your skin in the same way. We're cutting, cellular levels at a time. And so dog bites damage billions of cells at a time. And the amount of energy in a single bite is just astronomical by comparison to something made of sound.
Much easier, especially like we talked about the dependency of distance with sound. Much easier if you're that close to just bite.
Just bite them.
Just bang.
What if a dog came up to you and was just like, rawr, rawr, and then put its mouth on your arm, okay, and then was just like, and like you would, ow,
and your arm just got severed. Ah! Oh yeah, be careful with him. His bark's worse than his bite.
Yep, no
He
thanks.
could have just bit you, but he chose to cut your arm off with his horrible laser bark.
Laser bark.
Laser sound bark.
Good band name.
Oh
Laser
no.
Laser bark. Come see Laser Bark
Laser bark.
at the arena this Sunday.
They play in ultrasonic frequencies you can't hear.
They're still playing. I'm still playing, but you can't.
Oh, I know. They're rocking out. The ultrasonic guitar. The ultrasonic music show.
Come to the Ultrasonic Music Festival with headliner Laserbark. You can't hear it, but you'll feel it.
But all the dogs in the neighborhood are going nuts.
So, I don't think we meant to do this, but I want to apologize to our 2 question askers because we gave them 2 very unsatisfying answers. We basically said, what would a perfectly frictionless surface feel like?
Don't know.
How bad would a dog's bark have to be worse than its bite? Impossibly bad.
But we came up with Laserbark and their hit single Emotions Are Complicated. So I think it was all worth it in the end.
I hope so. Wow. What an episode. Whew. Wow.
An ultrasonic banger, really.
Well, with that, you're listening, again, to That's Absurd, Please Elaborate. I hope you enjoyed it. This show was created and written and produced by me, Trace Dominguez.
And me, Julian Huguet.
And it was produced and edited as well by the wonderful and ultrasonic guitar hero, Kyle Sisk.
Additional editing for this week's episode done by Sam Grant. Special thanks to listeners who submitted questions featured in this episode, Grace and Adam. If you would like to submit questions, you can look for the form in our show notes. You can email us at hello@that'sabsurdshow.com. You can visit our website, that'sabsurdshow.com/ask, or you can even call us and we will hear it. 302-TAPE-SHOW. That's 302-TAPESHO. Also, special thanks to our new Patreon subscribers. That would be Simon and They just wrote, it's just AH, so I assume it's just a surprise. Listen, we're surprised that you subscribed as well. If you want to support us like Simon and you can find find our Patreon, patreon.com/that'sabsurdshow. Get to vote on questions at all levels and then other perks as well. Adam is a Patreon sub at a higher perk, and we quote unquote made a portrait for him that he now uses, and it's really sweet because it's basically the dumbest thing that we could possibly type into an image generator. and Adam enjoyed it. So I'm glad for that.
Yes. Also, a shout out to our absurd administrators. That would be Les and Adam, who just updated himself to an absurd administrator. So thank you for that. He didn't even know we were going to answer his question, but he did that. So amazing. Thank you, Adam. Leave us a review wherever you're listening right now. If you like the show, even though it was a very disappointing set of answers in terms of satisfaction, please don't rate us based on that. Rate us based on whether you...
We put a lot of work into these non-answers.
We really did. It was a long walk to get here to basically say, I don't know.
It's almost like we were trying to walk but not going anywhere, you know? Like we were on a frictionless surface.
So leave us a review, please, wherever you're listening. Those reviews tell other people that this podcast is worth their time. You've already spent this hour with us. Thank you for that. Why don't you tell other people this is worth it? And you know what? While you're at it, if you could just take a second and tell one friend who is a nerd like you and me about the show. That is so helpful.
Yeah.
That's how we grow. Discovery, like learning about new podcasts, is so hard. That is a big problem with the podcast ecosystem. We all acknowledge it in the podcast world. The best way to grow any show is to ask people to tell their friends. So please, take a second, share it with a friend, be like, here's a frictionless ultrasonic banger for you.
I'm just going to bring up the question. I'd be like, what do you think a frictionless object would feel like? And then be like, I asked that to tell you about the show I listened to. They'll love it. They
will love it. So please, leave us a review, share it with your friends. And if you have a silly question, a ridiculous question, something that you want us to answer, please send it to us. We couldn't do it without your questions.
Finally, a special thanks to those listening on Nebula. Nebula listeners get access to ad-free versions of episodes. They can support us and other fantastic independent creators. There's a lot of them. I'm a fan of many of them. And if you are a fan of us and them as well, you can join Nebula at go.nebula.tv/That's Absurd Show. Well, Trace, What do we always say at the end of every episode? Yeah, we always say it in ultrasonic, so
we say it. Yeah, well, you can't actually tell because it's all ultrasonic.
yeah, it really it loses meaning if we try and translate it. It sounds better in the original ultrasonic.
Why be Winwedium when you can be lubriciousness? Coming this Friday.
Oh, these words are going to be added along with nubile to my least favorite, lubricious and Winwedium. I'm glad I don't ever have to say Winwedium again.
Yes.
Gross.
Lubricious.
Please stop. We're going to stop the episode so Trace can't say it anymore.
A smooth and slippery with oil or similar substance?
Nope, stop.
Lubricious.
Stop.
Wait, there's the noun form, lubricity.
Stop.
There's
Ooh,
the adverb.
lubricity. Lubricity is great. That's the tour name. Lubricity in 10 cities.
Laser bark on the lubricity tour. That's so stupid.